Filing for bankruptcy won't save you, Bradley screamed, slamming the desk as his phone rang for the 30th time. I stood by the door, adjusted my watch, and replied, "I'm not bankrupt, Bradley, but your entire M&A deal is. See you in court. Let's get one thing straight. Wall Street is full of people who think they are the smartest guys in the room just because their names are on the letterhead." Bradley Vance was exactly that kind of person. He was 34, wore custom-tailored suits that were slightly too tight, and had a habit of talking over everyone during meetings. He was also the nephew of Richard Vance, the man who actually built Apex Acquisitions from a two-room office in Chicago into a $120 million M&A powerhouse. I was there from day one, back in 2011, when Richard and I sat on folding chairs eating cold pizza while analyzing bankrupt logistics firms. We had a partnership built on mutual respect. I was 31 back then, fresh out of a grueling analyst role, and I knew how to dig through balance sheets. Richard was 57, a seasoned deal-maker who knew how to close transactions. He handled the relationships, and I built the quantitative models and the execution frameworks that made our acquisitions seamless. When we incorporated, we divided the equity. Richard held 60%, and I had 40%. But as we brought in institutional investors, we created two classes of shares. Class A was the voting stock, which the board and the main partners held. Class B was the non-voting stock, designed for long-term retention. By the time we grew, my ownership was restructured. I held 1 million Class A voting shares, giving me 10% of the voting power. I also had 1,500,000 Class B shares locked in a 15-year vesting schedule. That vesting schedule was my life's work. It was set to vest on my 15th anniversary with the firm, which fell on Monday, July 27, 2026. Based on our latest independent audit, which valued Apex at a conservative $120 million, those Class B shares were worth exactly $12 million. That was my retirement, my payout for 15 years of 80-hour workweeks. But things changed in 2023. Richard suffered a massive stroke. He retired to his estate in Florida, leaving his shares in the hands of a family trust. Because Richard had no children, his nephew Bradley was appointed as the trustee of the family's 40% voting block. Bradley immediately installed himself as the new CEO. The moment Bradley walked into the executive suite, the atmosphere turned toxic. He didn't care about M&A strategy. He didn't understand the difference between EBITDA and free cash flow. He just wanted the title, the private jet access, and the corporate credit card. Within 6 months, he hired his golf buddies to replace senior directors who had been with us for a decade. He sidelined me, moving my office from the corner suite to a windowless space near the server room. I didn't care about the disrespect. I cared about the work, and more importantly, I was counting down the days to my vesting cliff. In early 2026, Bradley found his big deal. He wanted Apex to acquire Zenith Freight, a regional shipping carrier, for $45 million. The moment the preliminary deal sheet landed on my desk, my internal alarms went off. Zenith was a disaster. They had $15 million in undisclosed liabilities, their fleet was aging, and they were losing their primary contracts. The $45 million price tag was an insane overvaluation. A realistic valuation was $12 million at best. I did some digging and found the reason behind the madness. Zenith Freight was owned by a holding company called Vance Maritime Group. The principal owner of Vance Maritime Group was none other than Bradley's brother-in-law. Bradley was attempting to use Apex Acquisitions capital to bail out his family's failing business, pocketing a massive finder's fee and funneling $45 million of corporate funds into his own circle. I wrote a 50-page audit report detailing the fraud, the inflated metrics, and the severe conflict of interest. I scheduled a private meeting with Bradley on Thursday, July 23rd, just 4 days before my vesting date. I walked into his office, laid the report on his desk, and told him that if he didn't pull the Zenith proposal from the upcoming Monday board meeting, I would deliver the audit report directly to the SEC and our lead lender, Vanguard Trust. Bradley didn't even blink. He reached into his drawer, pulled out a termination notice, and tossed it across the desk. It was a termination notice, effective immediately. He had timed it perfectly. By firing me on Thursday, July 23rd, I would be officially terminated 4 days before my 15-year anniversary. My 1,500,000 Class B shares would be forfeited. Bradley and the remaining board members, who were all his hand-picked allies, would absorb my equity, increasing their own share values while silencing the only person who could block the Zenith acquisition. "You're done, Julian," Bradley said, leaning back. "The board has voted. We are restructuring the executive team. Your services are no longer required. You have 30 minutes to clear your desk. Security will escort you out." I looked at the paper. I felt a surge of anger, but I didn't let it show. I had spent 15 years in corporate finance. I knew that in this game, the person who screams first is the one who loses. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood up, adjusted my tie, and looked him in the eye. Understood, I said. I will pack my things. Bradley laughed. No hard feelings, Julian. It's just business. Your $12 million shares are gone. They belong to Apex now. I picked up the envelope. I turned toward the door, then paused. You might want to read the fine print in the original 2011 shareholder agreement. Bradley, I said softly. Specifically, Section 9, Clause C. Bradley waved his hand. I've had our legal team review everything. Your contract is standard. You're an at-will employee. Now, get out of my office. I walked out, packed my mechanical keyboard and personal notebooks, and left. The security guard, Marcus, escorted me out, looking embarrassed. I put my cardboard box in the trunk, sat in the driver's seat, and took a deep breath. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed Donald Vance. Donald was 68, Richard's older brother, and the retired general counsel of Apex. He had retired 3 years ago, disgusted by his nephew's arrogance. He was a strict corporate attorney who had drafted the original shareholder agreements with me in 2011. Julian, Donald answered. I heard what happened. My nephew is an idiot. He just served me the papers, I replied. He thinks he saved the company $12 million. Donald chuckled. He doesn't know about Section 9, does he? No, I said. He didn't even look at the Section 9 file. He thinks his new legal team knows everything. They don't know the history, Donald said. Let's get to work. I'll meet you at my office in an hour. We have a poison pill to activate. Donald Vance's office was located in a restored brick building in the historic district, far away from the glass skyscrapers of downtown Chicago. The interior was filled with dark oak bookshelves, leather-bound legal volumes, and the faint smell of pipe tobacco. It was the office of a man who valued substance over style. When I walked in, Donald was sitting behind his mahogany desk, reading the original 2011 shareholder agreement. He looked up, adjusted his reading glasses, and pointed to the leather chair across from him. Sit down, Julian, Donald said. Let's look at the weapon my brother Richard and I built for you. I set my cardboard box on the floor and sat down. I pulled out the termination letter. He signed it, I said. Bradley and the compensation committee, they cited strategic misalignment as the reason. They didn't even try to invent a cause. Because they are lazy, Donald said, taking the paper. They wanted to avoid a wrongful termination lawsuit, so they used the standard without cause language, thinking the only consequence would be a standard severance. They forgot that your employment contract is tied directly to the shareholder agreement. Donald turned the page, pointing to a section highlighted in yellow. Section 9, Clause C, the Bad Faith Termination Protection Covenant. In the event that Julian Fletcher is terminated without cause within 90 days prior to any equity vesting cliff, Donald read, all unvested Class B shares shall immediately accelerate and vest. Furthermore, to protect the integrity of the partnership, said accelerated Class B shares shall automatically convert into Class C voting common stock. Donald looked at me over his glasses. Class C stock. Bradley's lawyers don't even know it exists because it's not listed in the public corporate registry. We created it in the original articles of incorporation, authorized but unissued, specifically for this scenario. What is the voting multiplier? I asked. 15 votes per share. Donald said, a thin smile appearing. Your 1,500,000 Class B shares convert into 1,500,000 Class C shares. That gives you 22,500,000 votes. But that's only the first stage. Read the next paragraph. I looked at the text. Clause C, subsection 2, the liquidated damages provision. It stated that if the termination occurred within 30 days of the vesting cliff, the company was contractually obligated to issue the terminated co-founder an additional 15 million Class C shares at par value, which was 1 cent per share. The total cost to purchase these 15 million shares was $150,000. I have $300,000 in accrued unpaid performance bonuses that Bradley withheld last year, citing market downturns, I said. Exactly, Donald replied. We don't even need to wire the money. We will serve them with a notice of exercise, directing the corporate secretary to offset the $150,000 from your withheld bonuses to purchase the 15 million Class C shares. Once that is processed, you will hold 16,500,000 Class C shares. I did the math. 16,500,000 Class C shares multiplied by 15 votes per share equaled 247,500,000 votes. Bradley's family trust held 4 million Class A shares, representing 4 million votes. The rest of the board and the minority shareholders held a combined 5 million Class A shares, representing 5 million votes. The total voting pool of the company would increase to 256,500,000 votes. My share of the total voting power would jump to over 96%. I would have absolute control of Apex acquisitions, I whispered. I can fire the entire board, block the Zenith merger, and liquidate Bradley's position. Donald leaned back. Yes, but we must execute this perfectly. If Bradley suspects anything, he will try to hold an emergency meeting to amend the charter and cancel the Class C authorization. We need to catch him completely off guard. Where is Bradley right now? Donald asked. I checked my phone. He's hosting a celebration dinner at Prime Cut Steakhouse. He's there with his brother-in-law, Marcus Vance, who owns Zenith Freight, and 3 of our key board members. They are celebrating the termination and the upcoming merger approval. Donald shook his head. Celebrating before the papers are filed. While he's drinking $100 Cabernet, we are going to file the corporate notices. We will draft the notice of acceleration, the notice of exercise of Class C purchase, and the demand for an emergency shareholder meeting to be held on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. We also need to contact Vanguard Trust, I added. They are the lead lender for our credit facility. If I am terminated, they have the right to declare a technical default and freeze our accounts. Donald nodded. Call Sarah Jenkins at Vanguard. Tell her what's happening, but tell her to keep the default notice ready until Monday morning. We want Bradley to think everything is running smoothly through the weekend. I called Sarah. I explained the situation, detailing Bradley's fraudulent attempt to acquire Zenith Freight to bail out his brother-in-law and my subsequent termination. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Julian, she said, Bradley's proposal looked suspicious, but we didn't have the audit to prove it. If you're out, we have zero confidence in Apex's ability to service the debt. We will draft the technical default notice. It will be ready to go on Monday morning at 8:30. Thank you, Sarah, I said. Just hold it until then. By 8 o'clock that evening, the filings were officially recorded in Delaware. I was now the holder of 96% of the voting power of Apex Acquisitions. Meanwhile, at the steakhouse, Bradley was raising a glass of champagne. He looked at his brother-in-law, Marcus, and the 3 board members sitting around the table. To a new era, Bradley said. No more old-school spreadsheets. On Monday, we close the Zenith deal, and we take this company to the next level. And we did it while saving $12 million of company equity. The board members laughed, clinking their glasses. Bradley took a deep drink, completely unaware that his company was no longer his. Friday morning at Apex Acquisitions began with quiet tension. Bradley had instructed HR to prepare my formal severance package, a standard document offering 6 months of salary in exchange for a complete waiver of all rights to sue, and more importantly, a waiver of any claims to the unvested Class B equity. At 10 o'clock, Bradley's secretary sent the draft to my personal email. I didn't reply. I was sitting in Donald Vance's office, watching the Delaware Corporate Registry database update in real time. The filing agent had processed our documents. The state of Delaware now officially recognized Fletcher Holdings LLC, my personal entity, as the owner of 16,500,000 Class C shares. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a registered courier walked into the lobby of Apex Acquisitions. He carried a heavy, bound legal packet addressed to Bradley Vance, CEO, and copies for each of the 5 board members. Bradley was in a marketing review when the packet was laid on his desk. Expecting a standard demand for a larger severance payout, he smiled and told his team to take a 15-minute break. He opened the envelope, pulled out the documents, and began to read. The smile left his face within 30 seconds. The first page was a formal notice of conversion, stating that pursuant to Section 9, Clause C of the 2011 shareholder agreement, Julian Fletcher's 1,500,000 Class B shares had been accelerated and converted into Class C voting stock. The second page was the notice of exercise, detailing the purchase of 15 million additional Class C shares at par value, funded by the offset of $150,000 in accrued, unpaid performance bonuses. The third page was a certified copy of the Delaware Certificate of Amendment, confirming the transaction and listing the new voting structure. The final page was the knockout blow, a formal demand, signed by the holder of 96.5% of the voting shares, calling for a special meeting of shareholders to be held on Monday, July 27th, at 9 o'clock in the morning in the main boardroom of Apex Acquisitions. The sole agenda item was the immediate removal of Bradley Vance as CEO, the removal of the current board, and the election of a new board. Bradley's hands began to shake. He slammed the documents down, picked up his phone, and dialed Bennett Caldwell, his lead corporate attorney in New York. Bennett, Bradley yelled, I just got a pile of garbage from Julian's lawyer. He's claiming he converted some Class B shares into Class C voting stock and that he owns 96% of the company. Tell me this is fake. There was a long silence on the line. Bradley, Bennett said, his voice flat. I received a copy of the filing from Delaware 15 minutes ago. I've been reviewing the original 2011 shareholder agreement. Did you know about Section 9, Clause C? Of course I didn't, Bradley screamed. My uncle signed that agreement 15 years ago. Why didn't your team flag this? Because we were hired to handle the 2023 transition, Bennett replied. The 2011 agreement is a private contract between the founders. It is completely bulletproof. The Class C authorization was built into the original charter. It's a classic poison pill, Bradley. You fired Julian without cause 4 days before his vesting cliff, which triggered the acceleration. Because it was within the 30-day window, he had the right to buy the penalty shares. We control the company, Bradley roared. Can we just refuse to issue the shares? Can we vote to cancel the Monday meeting? Bennett sighed. If you refuse to recognize the shares, you are committing a direct breach of fiduciary duty. Julian's lawyers will file for an emergency injunction in the Delaware Court of Chancery by 5 o'clock today. The court will grant it. They will freeze all corporate actions, and you will face personal liability. Furthermore, Vanguard Trust will immediately declare a default on the credit line. You cannot ignore this, Bradley. Bradley stood up, pacing his office, sweating. Then what do? We can't let him take the company. The Zenith deal is supposed to close on Monday. If Julian takes over, that deal is dead. Bennett was quiet. The only way to stop this is to prove that Julian was terminated for cause. If he was fired for cause, Section 9, Clause C doesn't apply. The shares don't accelerate. For cause? Bradley stammered. But we already signed the termination paper saying strategic misalignment. Then you need to find one, Bennett said. You need to audit his files, his emails, his expenses. Find anything. A compliance violation, an unauthorized expense, a conflict of interest. If you can find even a shred of evidence that he committed gross negligence or fraud before Thursday, we can amend the termination notice to for cause and file an emergency petition to stay the meeting. You have to find it before Monday morning. I'll find it, Bradley muttered. He hung up and called the IT director, Todd. Todd, Bradley ordered. I need you to pull Julian Fletcher's entire email archive, his network logs, and his local computer drive. Search for everything. If you don't find something that I can use to paint Julian as a thief by tomorrow morning, you're fired too. Yes, sir, Todd said. We'll start right now. Bradley hung up and looked out the window. He felt the walls closing in. He had thought he was playing corporate chess, but he had just realized he had been playing against a master who had set the trap 15 years before Bradley even knew the game existed. By Sunday evening, the IT department at Apex Acquisitions was a graveyard of empty energy drink cans. Todd, the IT director, was sitting in front of his monitor, his eyes bloodshot. He had spent 48 hours running searches on my archived emails, database logs, and server access. He had found absolutely nothing. Every single expense report I had filed over 15 years was backed by a receipt and a clear business purpose. Every email was strictly professional. I had never leaked a document, never used a corporate card for personal items, and never spoken to a competitor about non-public info. But Todd did find something else. While searching the archive, he uncovered the encrypted folder containing my final due diligence audit on Zenith Freight. Curiously, Todd also found a series of deleted emails from Bradley Vance's private account, dated 3 weeks prior. In those emails, Bradley had explicitly ordered the external auditors to remove the $15 million of Zenith's debt from the final report and to alter the freight metrics to make the company look profitable. Todd realized Bradley was committing securities fraud to bail out his brother-in-law's bankrupt business. And now Bradley was demanding that Todd fabricate evidence of misconduct to ruin my reputation. Todd knew that if he complied, he would be committing a felony. When the SEC eventually audited the system, Todd would go to prison. At midnight on Sunday, Todd made a choice. He copied the deleted emails and the audit files onto an encrypted flash drive. Then, he called Donald Vance and made a call that would end Bradley's career. Monday morning, July 27, 2026 arrived. At 8:30, Bradley Vance walked into the office, looking like a ghost. He went straight to his desk and dialed Todd. Todd, Bradley snapped. Do we have the evidence? Did you find the leak? Todd's voice was quiet. I found everything, Bradley. I have the files ready. Send them to Bennett Caldwell immediately, Bradley ordered. We are filing the amended termination papers in Delaware by 9:15. I can't do that, Bradley, Todd said. I've already delivered the files to Julian Fletcher and Donald Vance. I also gave them a signed affidavit detailing your instructions to fabricate evidence. I'm resigning, effective immediately. My keycard is on the desk. Bradley stared at the phone in shock as the line went dead. Before he could process the betrayal, his desk phone rang. It was Sarah Jenkins from Vanguard Trust. Bradley, Sarah said, her voice like ice. We have just served Apex with a formal notice of technical default. Pursuant to Section 7 of our agreement, the termination of Julian Fletcher without an approved successor constitutes a material adverse change. Effective immediately, your $40 million credit facility is frozen. All corporate operating accounts have been locked. What? Bradley gasped. Sarah, wait! We closed the Zenith merger today. The merger is dead, Bradley, Sarah replied. Vanguard will not fund a transaction based on fraudulent due diligence. We have reviewed Julian's audit report. We are demanding full repayment of the outstanding $25 million loan within 30 days. Goodbye. The line went dead. Bradley's cell phone began to ring. It was the payroll provider, warning him that the payroll could not be processed. Then his desk phone rang. It was Marcus Vance, his brother-in-law, screaming that the wire transfer for Zenith Freight hadn't arrived and that their creditors were preparing to seize their trucks. The office outside Bradley's door was in complete chaos. At 8:55, the elevator doors opened on the executive floor. I stepped out wearing a dark navy suit and a gold silk tie. Beside me was Donald Vance carrying a leather briefcase, followed by 2 attorneys and a court stenographer. Clara, the receptionist, looked up with wide eyes. "Mr. Fletcher?" she stammered. "Morning, Clara," I said. "Is the boardroom open?" "Yes, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "The board members are all in there. Thank you, Clara." We walked down the hallway and entered the boardroom. The 5 board members Bradley had appointed were sitting around the long glass table, looking terrified. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door slammed open. Bradley Vance walked in, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his tie crooked. He glared at me. "Get out of my boardroom, Julian," Bradley yelled. "You don't work here. This meeting is unauthorized. I have evidence of you leaking data. We are amending your firing to for cause." I didn't move. I sat at the head of the table. Donald Vance stood up, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a bound document and slid it across the table toward the directors. "Bradley," Donald said, his voice calm. "The game is over. We have the affidavit from your IT director. We have the deleted emails showing you ordered the alteration of the Zenith audit. We have the Delaware record showing Julian Fletcher holds 16,500,000 Class C shares, representing 96.5% of the voting power." Donald looked at the board members. "Gentlemen, as the majority shareholder, Julian Fletcher has called this special meeting." Bradley looked at his board members, sweat dripping down his neck. "Say something," he demanded. The board members remained silent. The oldest director, Thomas, looked down. "Bradley," Thomas said, "Vanguard has frozen our accounts. The company is defaulting. We have seen the audit. The Zenith deal is fraud. If we support you, we go to prison. I'm not going to prison for your family's shipping company." Thomas looked up at me. "Julian, how do we resolve this?" I looked at Thomas, then at the other board members. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rapid breathing of Bradley, who was leaning against the sideboard, looking like he was about to vomit. "We resolve this by following the law," I said, my voice calm. "First, we vote." I turned to the court stenographer. "Please record the votes of Fletcher Holdings LLC. As the holder of 16,500,000 Class C shares, representing 96.5% of the voting power, I vote to immediately remove Bradley Vance from the office of CEO and from his seat on the board." I paused, looking at the other directors. "I also vote to remove the entire current board of directors, effective immediately." Bradley let out a choked sound. "You can't do this. This is my family's company." "Your uncle built this with me, Bradley," I said, "and he built it on trust, numbers, and hard work. You tried to turn it into a personal piggy bank and a shield for your family's fraud. You did this to yourself." I turned back to the stenographer. "To fill the vacancies, Fletcher Holdings LLC votes to appoint Julian Fletcher as chairman of the board and CEO, and Donald Vance as lead independent director. We will appoint 2 additional independent directors within 30 days. The stenographer's fingers flew, recording the votes. The transaction was clean and legal, under Delaware General Corporation Law Section 151. "The vote is recorded," Donald Vance announced, closing his briefcase. "Bradley Vance is no longer an officer or director of Apex Acquisitions. He has no authority." I looked at the doorway. Marcus, the security guard, was standing there. "Marcus," I said, "please escort Mr. Vance from the building. Ensure he does not remove any files, electronic devices, or corporate property." Marcus nodded. "Yes, Mr. Fletcher, it would be my pleasure." Marcus walked over to Bradley. "Mr. Vance, let's go." Bradley looked around the room, searching for an ally. But his board members were looking down, and his New York lawyer, Bennett Caldwell, had already hung up the phone. With his head bowed and his suit wrinkled, Bradley Vance was led out of the boardroom, past the employees who had gathered to watch. The moment Bradley was out, I sat down at the head of the table. I called Sarah Jenkins at Vanguard Trust. "Sarah," I said, "Bradley Vance has been removed as CEO and chairman. I have been appointed as the new CEO. The board has voted to permanently cancel the acquisition of Zenith Freight. We are returning Apex to its core investment strategy." Sarah let out a breath. "Thank goodness, Julian. That is the best news I've heard. Vanguard Trust will immediately rescind the default notice. We are unlocking your operating accounts right now. The payroll wire will go through as scheduled." "Thank you, Sarah," I said. We hung up. I looked at the remaining directors. "Gentlemen," I said, "your terms on the board have ended, but if you cooperate with the upcoming SEC investigation regarding Bradley's pressure on you, I will direct the company's legal counsel not to pursue personal civil claims against you for breach of fiduciary duty." The directors nodded quickly, expressing their gratitude and relief. Over the next 6 months, the fallout settled. Bradley Vance's attempt to cover up the Zenith Freight liabilities was exposed. Todd's IT logs and the deleted emails were delivered to the SEC and the DOJ. Bradley was indicted on federal charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and falsifying corporate books. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 48 months in a federal penitentiary. Without the Apex buyout, Vance Maritime Group collapsed. Zenith Freight declared bankruptcy, and its assets were liquidated. Bradley's brother-in-law lost everything, and the family estate in Florida had to be sold to cover Bradley's legal debts. For me, the payout was substantial. As the CEO and majority voting shareholder, I restructured the firm's capital. The board approved a redemption agreement for my Class C shares. The company purchased my 1,500,000 shares for their true audited value of $8 per share, resulting in a $12 million payout. Furthermore, to resolve the breach of contract claims for my bad faith termination, the board approved an additional $2 million settlement. A total of $14 million was wired to my personal holding account. I didn't retire, though. I remained as the CEO of Apex, running the firm alongside Donald Vance. We hired a new, professional team of analysts, rebuilt our reputation, and returned to closing clean M&A deals. Sometimes I look out the window of my new corner suite, looking down at the Chicago River. I think about the 15 years of hard work, the long nights, and the moment Bradley Vance thought he could take it all away. I smile, taking a sip of my coffee. Bradley was right about one thing. The world belongs to the people who know how to scale, but he forgot that you never start a war unless you've already read the rules.